Hello, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you may be today. Thanks everybody for joining us for the first webinar of the Idea Growth Association Power Lunch Summit in partnership with GeoComply. Today we're going to be discussing the do's and don'ts of advertising and iGaming with an amazing panel of experts. Before we begin, there's just a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the session, please send them to us in the chat box and we will attempt to get to them prior to the end of the session. Also, a recording of this webinar will be sent to you afterwards. And we encourage you to let us know any topics you would like us or future panels to address in the follow-up survey that you will receive. Let's get started by introducing our panel today. I'm Michelle Cohen. I'm a partner here at IFRA Law in Washington, D.C., and we are also a founding member of Idea Growth. Many of you have probably seen, we do have a focus in the gaming and iGaming space, and our chambers ranked in gaming. I wanted to turn it over to my panel. We'll start with Daniel Hartman, who is the director at the Colorado Division of Gaming. Daniel.
Hi, Michelle, and rest of the panel and attendees. Dan Hartman, I'm the director of the Division of Gaming in Colorado. Been with the Department of Revenue for 29, almost 30 years, and had a few different groups that I've been with, but now with gaming, and glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Moving over to Anna Sainsbury, who is the board trustee for Conscious Gaming and the chairman for GeoComply.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to join this panel with such a great group of people. Yeah, I founded GeoComply and have been participating and overseeing the geolocation aspects of the gaming industry since inception in New Jersey in 2013. And so we have been looking at all of the different measures and steps for compliance that take place as these markets open, and what needs and processes are there to secure these markets, especially from a geolocation and fraud perspective, and now with Conscious Gaming looking into responsible gaming measures.
Thank you, Anna. Moving over to someone that many people who are tuning in likely have interacted with over the years, David Rebuck, the director of the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and to the other panelists. It's really a pleasure to join you. For those who are unfamiliar with me, I'm the director of the Division of Gaming Enforcement in the state of New Jersey, and I'm also an assistant attorney general, because in the state of New Jersey, the attorney general of the state oversees gaming in addition to all his or her other functions associated with the responsibilities of being attorney general. And particularly for today's session, I think it's important to know that as a sister agency to the Division of Gaming Enforcement under the Attorney General is our Division of Consumer Affairs, who oversees truth in advertising, consumer protection laws, and I have a very good and close relationship with that division and their director and everything they do in those areas.
Thank you. Last but definitely not least, we have Michael Daley, who is the CEO of Catena Media.
Thanks, all. Glad to be here. I am Michael Daley. I'm the CEO of Catena. We are an affiliate for the gaming space for North America, working in all the regulated markets as well as globally. So we run hundreds of websites worldwide, mostly focused on organic affiliation marketing. So very excited to be here and talk about our experience. I've been with the company, I've been the CEO since about the start of the year, and with it for the last couple of years. Prior to being CEO, I was running the North American setup. Been in the gaming space in North America for 20 odd years or so in land-based and online.
Great, thank you so much. And we very much appreciate you all being with us today. I know you all have very busy schedules, and thanks again for being with us. We want to go to the next slide. Just a little background for you all on IDEA. IDEA Growth Association, as some of you may know, is a nonprofit association that advocates for the growth of regulated online gaming and sports betting businesses in the U.S. with a focus on benefiting job growth, state tax revenues, and consumer protection. IDEA's membership, which you can see here, is a broad range of companies that serve various sectors of the industry, including operators, developers, technology companies, payment processors, media companies, and law firms, including IFRLaw, which is a founding member. The association advocates for responsible gaming and seeks to educate the general public, state legislators, and other stakeholders like they're doing this week with the webinar series with GeoComply. And special thanks to our friends at GeoComply for partnering with IDEA Growth to put on the webinar this week. I think we can move on to start our panel. There's a lot of issues to discuss in advertising, and we as a group came up with some questions that we thought would be really interesting to explore. But in terms of advertising, there's so many benefits to advertising when it comes to all industries, particularly in the gaming industry, where you can promote competition, build consumer loyalty, and educate consumers. But there's also needs to be a balance and being competitive while avoiding this problem of oversaturation, which I live in a regulated sports betting market, and there are a lot of ads, fairly constant. And so going to our panel, a key question is, how can advertisers, including operators, find balance in being competitive while avoiding oversaturation where it's too constant and it's too noisy? And I think we'll start with Dan, if you don't mind, to hear your thoughts on this and whether have you heard complaints about oversaturation?
Well, sure. Colorado has, right now has 25 operators. So there's an awful lot of people that are pushing for advantage in the space. When you create a system like we have, and a bunch of, a lot of states do, and have so many people, it really is a balance. And I think that what we're seeing is a lot of ads, and we're starting to get a little bit of feedback from legislators, from other folks, that there's too much, and they really didn't expect this much. Even though the competitive environment is there, they didn't expect this much. And I think that one of the things, they really do need to find a balance, because the last thing you want is to have advertising legislated.
Right. David, have you heard similar issues come up in New Jersey?
Oh yes, we've had well, first of all, in the bricks and mortar and the traditional retail market, every state that has oversight of gambling on those has historically had laws or regulations, or both, that allow for the oversight of advertising of that industry. And I know in New Jersey we have it in our Casino Control Act. We even have regulations associated with the criteria governing advertising. That was established back in the late 70s. The challenge we have here, and Dan highlighted it, is we now have moved very quickly in certainly since 2018 for online sports wagering. New Jersey, we've had online casino gaming since 2013, as Anna said. And so the challenge is for advertising to convert what were laws and regulations created for a traditional bricks and mortar operation, a little different than where they are today with the advertising means that are available to companies where people are really engaged in the applications that allow them to gamble online. And so yes, we are yesterday was the first big day of NFL football, and I think we all remember how now the NFL has limited sports wagering advertisements in their games. Others have not, and I think that gets a part of the concern with saturation, where the industry or the product is trying to limit advertising like the NFL did. Others have chosen not to. And my favorite memory on where saturation occurred was in 2015. I call it the fantasy sports ad wars that happened that year. And anybody who watched those ads will remember the reaction from governments and legislators and executive branch people on overseeing fantasy sports to say, what's going on here? And there was very heavy oversight and changes in how that industry would have been regulated if it had been an industry that did not combine its operations with the traditional sports that we have now in 2018. So that's a lesson to be learned, and I think Dan's right. If the industry does not control itself, the government will step in and certainly create standards that they may not want.
Right. So it seems like there is really a push, perhaps not super articulated yet, but certainly a kind of subtle movement to encourage industry self-regulation. Michael, since you're on the advertiser space side, what's your views on how operators and others can find a balance in being competitive? You want to be out there advertising because everybody else is, while avoiding oversaturation or some of these potential issues that could lead to further regulation.
Absolutely. I'll caveat it by saying, as an affiliate, we tend towards organic traffic. We're lucky in the sense that you have to be searching for us before you find our version of advertising. But I agree heavily with David and echo with Daniel, is we have to find a way to regulate ourselves. If the DFS debacle, if you want to call it that, is a prime example, but the UK has also gone down this path with no regulations. Thankfully, North America started with regulation, so we have who will guard the guards themselves. But the UK went so far, the pendulum swung heavily the other way when it just got to the point that you couldn't watch a soccer or European football match without it being overly saturated. So operators have to learn how to not kill the golden goose, so to say, for lack of a better way to put it. I'm not the most politically correct probably on terms there, but yes, we have to learn how to work together. I think North America has some great examples of this, and historically, and how operators and vendors work together with organizations like the AGA, and forgive me, I don't remember the name of the vendor one now, though I've participated over the years with Bally and Shuffle and some other companies, but we're able to come together and help set some standards and some rule books and at least have those conversations before you're having in front of some panel that David or Daniel are overseeing, because that's really not where you want to have that discussion. Again, self-regulation by operators is possible. We have done it in North America before, but we have to look at the ramifications for the business and be able to cooperate in a competitive landscape. So I think we can do it. Yeah. It's just a matter of getting that going, and how do you spur that before we have an incident that forces it.
Right. Yeah. Anna, did you have some thoughts? I know that GeoComply certainly helps operators comply with regulatory requirements. And on the advertising side, what were your thoughts on, avoiding this issue of oversaturation?
Yeah, I think, it's a balance. At this moment for online support, the gaming industry is now offering online in 18 states as well as the District of DC. And I think the original conversation of when we were looking at regulating online gaming in the US was to provide a safe environment for all of those Americans participating in sports betting and other forms of online gaming prior to it becoming regulated. And so, just yesterday, we announced that we saw 58.2 million transactions since the beginning of NFL, which is tremendous. That's a 126% increase from last year. And so I think one thing that says is that more and more Americans are now turning off their bets with the illegal operators and betting in safer environments. And there's a balance that we have to do to get there, because many of these brands that are offshore have been utilized by Americans for a very long period of time, so over 10 years. And so there has been trust built up between those brands and Americans. And so now we have opportunity to educate. And I think we really need to focus on that balance between exposing Americans to the fact that there are legal and regulated and tax-paying alternatives for them to game with that offer also products for responsible gaming should they need any support. And I think that we really need to focus on both what the operators need, which is monitoring some sort of considerate cost per acquisition that enables them to operate within the market, but also ensure that we're educating players which brands, which states have legalized, which ones are legal, and what they can expect. And so I think that we really need to be cautious as we do that. Probably, just like Michael said, look at targeted advertising as our main source. And so that oversaturation and general marketing doesn't become something that tires out Americans.
That's a great point on the targeted advertising versus kind of the constant, just sort of freewheeling out there advertising. In terms of, I know we must have a number of viewers today who are interested in, understanding the problem. What are some of the best practices that gaming companies and advertisers could keep in mind? And I was going to start and just say, before we even get into industry specific, certainly in every state, Dan and David have alluded to this, there's a pre-existing set of laws, and also at the federal level, just basically prohibiting deceptive, unfair advertisements. Anything that already might be considered deceptive or unfair, and that's often sometimes difficult to determine. I mean, from a viewer's perspective, it's important to take kind of a holistic approach, like what is this ad saying, and is it clear, and is free, and is bonus a bonus, or do you have to do something to get that bonus? And I do a lot of work on sweepstakes and contests and free to play, which I know a lot of the sports betting companies and gaming operators are using. So those are, from my perspective, let's start at the very beginning, which is, making sure that the advertisements don't present any problems under any of the currently deceptive advertisements laws. And if you're offering something free, it is in fact free, and who's eligible and what you have to do to get it. But just kind of going back to our panel, Dan, from your perspective, what are some of the best practices for gaming companies and other advertisers?
Well, sure. We took a clue from a lot of the states that started before us, And really, when you talk about deceptive advertising, that's what our rules and regulations really go towards. The competition at the time was, wasn't as pronounced with us. We only started with 4, now we're up to 25. But I think that they really need to make sure that that they're reaching out and they're getting some of the things, that they're not oversaturating, but we're getting some of them that we've had a few ads lately that are actually coming with the positive of the entertainment side of it and talking about responsible gaming. So they're not just pushing the product, but they're really jumping into that responsible gaming piece and knowing your limits and doing those things. I think that helps. But the other thing is that, we know that there are other businesses that advertise on TV that you just kind of tune out. And I think that the more they saturate, the more they look at, we're going to see them tuning out of these ads. They're not going to be as productive. They can take an example from some of the other industries. The alcohol industry has an association where they're not just racing to the top to try to be the best. They're actually working together to make sure that advertising is controlled internally with the industry and not turning it over to government.
Great points. David, what are your thoughts on best practices?
Well, again, I think we've all highlighted this with regards to content, and that the United States is substantially different from where other jurisdictions that have advertising controls. And that, as you mentioned, Michelle, we have truth in advertising laws, federal, state level consumer protection laws that deal with content, make sure that it's accurate, it's transparent, and not deceptive, and the person understands exactly what they're receiving, either from a direct mailing or generally through some kind of a notice that would be provided to them through other mass media. We've had tremendous experience in this state, even though with the tobacco industry and the alcohol industry, they have sufficiently greater controls on advertising than the gaming industry, the online gaming industry does today. So I think there's a lesson to be learned here for the gaming industry is take a look at what the tobacco and alcohol industry have done and gone through, as Dan alluded to establish, in my mind, probably higher levels of protections in content and even saturation that exist in the gaming industry today. I think the second and third areas that we, as regulators, will always focus on is the advertising is meant to appeal to what group of people. And there's two groups of people that regulators are most interested in protecting. The underage, in our case, anybody under 21 is banned from gaming on sports and online and casino gambling, and responsible gaming, what I would say are the at-risk compulsive gambling individuals. And so I would suggest again to the gaming industry that they not ignore the focus groups or content as it relates to interacting with any number of responsible gaming groups who could provide guidance, opinions, and even help you with content that would not be perceived as being overly attractive to those who are compulsive gamblers. And then, as we all know, there's all sorts of disclaimers that are on any ad. And I recognize this as a challenge for the gaming industry because our state laws require certain responsible gaming features that certainly other states do not. And but if you're advertising in New Jersey, you better have those standards in play. And I don't know how to deal with that with the industry, but I would suggest if you work together for best practices, there are ways that could be a one-stop shopping, I think, in your global or multi-state advertising campaigns.
Right. Michael, what are your thoughts on how to address some of these issues in terms of, promoting responsible gaming, being careful about underage advertising to underage folks, while having an effective advertising campaign that informs consumers and educates them, while being careful around some of these key issues and existing requirements.
I think obviously beyond just talking about what is following the laws of the individual states, which are nice that there's our baseline. I think the comments around underage gaming and underage people watching sports is very pertinent. We have a long history, which sometimes maybe we ignore in the online space from our land-based businesses here before, is things like, in non-correct terms, we called slot for tots initiatives and other things, which were to pay attention to what icons, what sports figures, what role models are we calling out for the advertising that may have an impact on the younger generation. With the slots, we historically went for game shows or people that were recognized for an older crowd, and that is what we need to be very careful of. Is it's down to 21, but still, it's look at what is your center of your audience and make sure you're not skewing too far into the influencer space that is affecting the 12 to 20-year-old. And again, that comes to the industry as a group needs to come together and sort of set some of its own standards above and beyond what the regulations have set, or we will run into challenges where those become regulated. And you need to do that in balance, I get, with being fun and having good advertising that's going to attract the audience you want and keep it interested, especially when there are probably so many of those ads out just about now in all those states that have legalized online betting at the start of the NFL season. But there has to be some balance on who you choose and who you make your role models, because those are more role models beyond just online sports betting. Those are sports role models.
Sure. Yeah, and we've seen that kind of echoes back. I feel like somebody was getting to that point of within the tobacco industry when there was things like Joe Camel, and that was shown not to be proper advertising, because obviously having kind of the cartoon character or similar tends to attract youngsters. So to your point, to staying away from that, to now that seems quite obvious, but I think that took a long time for the tobacco industry to move away from that. Anna, I wanted to go to you as well in terms of some of the best practices that you've seen in the industry or had some thoughts on.
Yeah, I think, I'd like to echo what Director Rebuck said. I think that succinct, responsible gaming inclusion in each ad is important, that the amount of states that are now open has meant that the responsible gaming messages at the bottom of each ad or included within each ad has gotten a little bit complicated for somebody to follow, especially if they're having a tricky time. I mean, it's starting to sound like one of those new prescription advertisements where there's someone speaking at 1,000,000 miles a minute and you have no idea what they say, but you heard a lot and clearly articulated the perks of the prescription. So I think we need to make sure that we don't become that in this space. And I think that there is the opportunity for us to work together to ensure that that happens. And then also, looking at what Michael said, I think that there's a holistic view that Americans have of the gaming industry. And we're not only being judged on the parts that we regulate and each of our regulated brands, but we're being judged on all of the ads people are exposed to. And so that's going to include the social games that are for kids that look like slot games that have high buy-ins. It looks and acts like it's money and children don't know. It's all of the Google searches when someone, they don't know if they're going to a regulated affiliate that's directing the traffic to a legal site, or if it's a unregulated affiliate that doesn't mind if you're underage and doesn't mind if you have gaming problems. So I think that we need to make sure as an industry, and even look outside of the parts that we touch, but how can we work with the social gaming entities? How can we work with like the Google App Store and Apple apps to say, you know, these are the problems. This is the Facebook. This is the problem with some of these games, and this is how it comes across. And this is what it leads to once someone gets older and has the opportunity to visit casinos or play online with legal sports books. So I think that we need to look at it holistically and not just focus on those operators that have already put their hands up to get licensed and work in these regulated jurisdictions, but how can we work together to look outside of that?
Great points. Thank you. For advertisers that, you know, really do want to be responsible, on the ball advertisers addressing all of, you know, these issues that we've discussed, what are some of the challenges that they face in doing those? I know I heard a mention about responsible gaming, and I think, you know, when we get to different jurisdictions, is that difficult to manage a different responsible gaming resources when you're a company operating in several states? Going back to Dan, are there challenges for online gaming companies that you've been seeing?
There really are, and I think that, you know, most of the companies have a big presence in their compliance for licensing and all the other things that go along with gaming. I think it's just as important that as they grow and as fast as they're growing, they really have a compliance section that looks at advertising. What we're seeing is you got a national ad that doesn't go through the same, you know, when you had 2 or 3 states, doesn't go through that same filter of compliance that you have. So states that have different laws, different things you can bet on, all the other things that the ads really need to make sure that they target what's going on in the state you're advertising. You know, the tagline that you talked about and that everybody's talked about that's getting so large that you really can't read the responsible gaming things that are on it. Really start to focus on the states that you're in. I know it's easy to buy a national ad and create a national ad as a company that you can put in many jurisdictions, but if you're not putting it through the same compliance filter that you have for licensing and all the other things that you're doing within a state, you're going to miss, and we've seen people miss the things that are important in our state. You know, if you're when you're advertising in a stadium, know your audience. There's so many people in a college stadium that are underage, that are looking at the ads, they're looking at the banners. We're not just talking about TV advertising. We're talking about stationary advertising in a stadium, and who's watching that from, you know, my kids that go with me or other things, how that gets put, and the programs that they're on, you know, what that they're not targeting or they're not advertising on children's shows or shows that are really looked at by people that are underage.
All right. Moving over to David, did you have thoughts on that, this issue of the particular challenges that companies are facing as they're rolling out all sorts of advertising, particularly in the fall season?
Well, Ken, I think Anna really alluded to it. When we talk about responsible gaming, it's much broader than just the challenges facing advertising. And although advertising is an important component in messaging support programs that are available to those who are struggling with gaming, I think Anna highlighted it, that technology is really going to have to be changed to allow people to obtain and receive information in a much more expedient way that allows them to know what to do or how to do it or who to go to for assistance. And the advertisers need to be at the table when those changes are going to be made. And this is going to be more than just a state-by-state process, in my personal opinion. You've heard from Dan, you've heard from me. We recognize the challenges in online gambling and certainly online sports wagering for dealing with those who are struggling with gambling. And I would just suggest to the advertisers that they should focus on this as one of their primary needs to deal with in the long term. The second point that I see that as a regulator I deal with constantly is, again, I think Dan alluded to this or somebody did, is the accuracy of the promotions, which goes beyond advertising. So you see many promotions out there on billboards, on mass mailings. And sometimes they're hard to understand. For the first 2 years of online gambling in New Jersey, I made my staff review and approve every promotional plan that was going to be offered to customers in New Jersey. It was overwhelming. We thought that, or I thought that after 2 years, we'd at least have people understand what our expectations were on promotions. But it got to a volume, I needed to move people off. And now we have not, instead of a proactive way of providing approvals on promotions, we react. And if there's an area of complaints that comes to us on a regular basis from consumers, it's not understanding the promotional requirements that are published and ultimately accepted by them in order to engage in gambling. Which begs the question is, do I got to go back and do what I did in 14 and 15, even in the 16, to now say, sorry, companies, no promotions until they're pre-approved by the state of New Jersey? That would be a very challenging responsibility for the state. But if I'm forced to, and Dan knows that if you're forced to, you're going to do it. And then the last thing I would suggest is that to the advertising companies is don't allow your marketing staff to operate unchecked. They can get you in a lot of trouble because they have different objectives, different views on how to do things. And sometimes they don't have the understanding of the compliance people do in your companies to give them guidance on what they should be looking at doing the right way. And again, as regulators, we license the marketing people who work for companies. So they should understand that if they really get out of control, we're going to go after them in different ways that are different than going after the company. And but the marketing staff, I understand that. We understand they have a business need. They want to attract people to come. They want to be creative, but they have to do it in a way that they're not unchecked. And that's incumbent upon the advertising companies to understand that. Because if they act unchecked, it's going back to what Dan suggested. And it will be checked, but it'll be checked in a way that you won't really be happy with, because it'll be much different than it is today.
Really important points, David. Thank you. I know that I, in my marketing and advertising work, I was just telling this story the other day. I was on site at a client and some years back, and they had a new chief marketing officer, person, and the lawyers from the general counsel's office said, we want you to go meet, we'll call him Jim, go meet Jim. We want you to scare him. Explain to him all the bad things that can happen if you do not follow the required, laws when it comes to advertising. The goal is to get your message out there, to gain customers, to make sales. But, you don't want to run one campaign that is going to result in class actions and so much for your sales, and lead to an enforcement problem. So. Really important point for marketing to be working with compliance and understanding what the regulators are expecting of them. Michael, for someone who is, trying to help a company get their message out, what are your thoughts, having heard what our regulators have told us?
So I think one of the challenges is online gaming companies understanding compliance in this country and how it goes to the state. One of the other things I'll say from, having been with gaming companies and vendors, and now this is my first foray really into the advertising side of things with Catena Media, is something I have found is that the regulations and the regulators are more set up to work with the online gaming companies than the advertisers. It is much more difficult for, if we want to do targeted advertising via a mailing list as an advertiser, you have to work through the operators to get a copy of the blacklist, which is the people you can't send anything to. So you end up doing wider distributions because you don't get access from the operators because they're not willing to give that to the advertisers. So we end up blanketing more of the population with unwanted advertising. So there's still, I think, an evolution that needs to happen between the advertising firms and the regulation bodies in order to make us smarter. It's very difficult, for example, to get the right advertisers working on Facebook as opposed to the offshore, because Facebook, for example, or some of the larger platforms will say, you need to have a license in Michigan if you're going to advertise in Michigan. Great, we do that. We advertise via multiple state and national brands in Michigan. Well, the national brand is also advertising other places. So wait, it's not, but yes, it's regulated in those other places, but no, it can only regulate in Michigan if it's advertising in Michigan. So it's just very murky as an advertiser, surprisingly to me, considering how well established many of the other sections of regulation are for the actual operators. So I think we still have a ways to go, and we advertisers have a large onus on us in order to work with the regulatory bodies in order to try and help establish maybe standards that are specific to the advertisers. And they differ from the states, as you would expect, and some are further along. As David said, I do recall the days when actually it was with more the operator side than the advertiser at that point, of the promotions needing to go through prior to release. And that was at least a first good step initially for people to learn that this was a brave new world compared to where many of the operators came from.
Thank you. Anna, what were your thoughts on now that we've heard from the regulators and from Michael, sort of addressing some of these challenges particular to underage, problem gambling, et cetera?
Well, I think, and I know anyone that's in the industry is aware of this, but we are tight on talent. And as Director Rebuck said, he spent those 2 years getting his team to go through so many ads and really using that as an opportunity probably within themselves to set expectations of what should be best practice, but also to educate the operators and those that were in the market in those early days on what those expectations are. And I think if you go back to the early days when the US market was smaller, there was that set group that really understood what the principles were. And that was also because there were fewer bills to consider and we really knew the fundamentals of what was opening up the market. But now the market is so much bigger and we have institutional investments. Many of the companies have gone public. We are growing at this rapid rate. Training and really educating our teams internally on what those practices are is a hurdle that the industry is having to overcome as we mature. And so I think especially as some operators are looking to outsource because there isn't enough gaming talent to help serve the marketing and advertising teams, how do we really articulate what the intention of each of our requirements are? Because really their expectations, their code of conducts, their principles, and these guys are working, trying to generate a feeling in advertising or in marketing. And that is really hard to be specific at. It's not like game outcomes where we have a random number generator or something. It's much easier to audit and regulate. And so I think that we need to take that time and probably to have more education systems within our industry to help bring up the intelligence of those that are coming in on what those principles are for respecting legal age. I mean, many advertisers would probably think, well, once they get to the site, they're going to be age and identified anyway. But they don't really think about the impact if it looks like it's going to be fun, or there's a young person that is in the background and their age is questionable. How does that resonate for the general public? And then what are the repercussions of that? So I think that we need to sort of almost break down these principles and codes and expectations and probably really articulate them, assuming that the person that is creating an ad and looking at that doesn't have the same knowledge of our industry and those repercussions. Because I think, Michelle, you're right. We have these times where we go in and we try and scare our new team members to say, this is why compliance matters. This is why we can't just release source code, because we need to make sure that it is fair, secure, and auditable. And those are the principles we are so aware of in our sector, but it's not as obvious to people that are coming into gaming. And we need people to come into our industry because we need more talent, we need more creativity, we need more innovation, but we also, need to make sure that we transfer our knowledge to those people that are coming in.
Thanks. Excellent points. In terms of, I know our time is short today, so I want to try to get to all of our questions. In terms of, I'm an operator, I'm an advertiser, and I get it. I don't want to use Joe Camel. I don't want to be targeting ads to underage or vulnerable populations. But how can I get my arms around compliance? What are some best practices for ensuring compliance, especially when it comes to the different state laws? What might be allowed in Colorado might not be allowed in Virginia or New Jersey. And what are some suggestions for organizations that are trying to deal with these different issues that, do vary quite a bit state to state? Dan, would you have some thoughts on that?
Sure, and I think I'm going to go back to one of the things that Michael said, and a point that he said. I think you've got you really have in this space you're going to have that cooperation between the operator and all of these third-party vendors. And I mean, Dave and I both either license or register those third-party vendors, and we have some regulatory power over them. But I think when Michael says they need access to the excluded list, to the self-excluded list, they change all the time, and it's up to the operator. The operator is the top of the pyramid here. And ensuring they're all putting these third-party acquisition people on their on their team, and going out and trying to get more and more people, but they have to make sure that they're getting the right information to these third-party people, and it's up to date, not just once in a while. That we're not getting to the people that have self-excluded themselves. Now they're getting those things, the advertising. Really has to be a partnership, and I think that's kind of been the theme today. It's really a partnership to really make sure that they police this industry themselves, or they're going to call on folks like David and I to do it for them, and I think that's where it becomes very, very difficult.
David, what are your thoughts on some of these best practices that we can suggest for operators and advertisers, in addition to some that we've heard?
Well, I would say one of the hot topics that we see regularly covered, and I think even Michael highlighted it earlier, was to keep a close eye on what is happening in the United Kingdom, as opposed to the worst case scenario that could impact advertising in gaming opportunities here in the United States. And I think it's a valid point to keep an eye on it, but there are significant differences between the United Kingdom and the United States in regards to our cultures, our values, how we perceive gaming, standards that have been in play in the United States for years and years and years that never existed in the United Kingdom. I mean, their age of majority at one point was 16 for gambling. There's a 21. That's a huge difference. Their truth in advertising laws or consumer protection laws that allow for private course of actions, treble damages, as you know, Michelle. They don't have that. They don't have that. The responsible gaming side of the house, compared to what exists and has existed in the United States, virtually non-existent. But the challenge here should not be underestimated because we're different, okay? The fears, the concerns that are raised by those who are opposed to gaming or are upset with the saturation or the content should not be underestimated. And I'll give you a primary example. In the state of New Jersey, one of the strongest advocates supporting gaming changes was Senator Ray Lesniak. He's got my number on speed dial. He has since retired from the Senate. But when I hear from him, he's calling me about advertising and an ad he might have saw that he feels is inappropriate. And that is from a person who is a huge advocate of allowing for sports wagering in the United States and online gambling, because he was one of the primary sponsors associated with the laws and the constitutional challenges that we had to go through in order to implement it in the United States, or in New Jersey, which ultimately gets implemented in the United States. So my point is that keep an eye on the UK. Know that, you know, political elements could definitely intervene, but the best practices, I think you've heard from all of us, the industry needs to pull themselves together and establish best practices, because if you do not, we will. And I think, you know, we've done that already. We're doing it now. We're continuing to push the industry in New Jersey to do things, better practices in these areas, and they know it. But I'd rather have them come to me as a group and indicate these are what we believe are best practices. We're going to talk to them, but if we're taking the lead as regulators, you shouldn't be waiting on the regulators to drive the bus on this one. You should be at the head of the table doing the actions that are needed to be done with your partners, as Dan mentioned, with your vendors, with your contractors that provide these various important services, and know that strive for the best practices you can have, and don't go race to the bottom. Try to get best practices to race to the top. That's my suggestion to them. And it's hard because of what Anna said. The dirge of talent it's true. These are new forms of business opportunities that are changing on a daily basis, sometimes, you know, where all the states are rushing to determine if they want to implement these new forms of activities in their states. And
Sure.
it's not going to change. Anybody on this panel, I think, would tell you there's going to be more and more states coming on board, big ones, in the near future. And that will bring about more challenge.
Right. Michael, having heard that, you know, new states coming on board and a push for industry to, you know, get ahead of this before you hear from the regulators telling you what you have to do. What are your thoughts on how to get your company and your partner companies' arms around the compliance aspect?
So I think to Director Rebuck's point, yes, we're not the UK. UK is where the UK government stepped in because the operators weren't doing it, but we already had a lot of the government rules here when you come to the North American landscape, but it's investing in compliance. You know, I remember when I got to the gaming industry almost 20 years ago, in land-based, but we have product compliance, we have personnel compliance. It's different departments. You have to really invest in the education and training of your organization, the whole organization, on what compliance means, and that it's going to be different by state, and it's not something to be taken lightly. It's not lip service. It is actually somebody who should be at the table when you're having the discussions around what marketing you're doing or how the marketing works and what you're doing in another jurisdiction that could impact the jurisdiction you're currently talking about. It's holistic. So I think that's in short, that's the message I would give, is compliance is an absolute essential part to business in North America. So, and probably the world nowadays, but definitely North American. So you need to invest in that as an organization.
Anna, what's your take on, having heard our panelists, our other panelists? What's your take on how to get your arms around, how a company gets their arms around all of these differing state issues? You know, I've heard a lot. You know, we want to comply. What's the best way to get your arms around it?
I think that definitely joining groups like IDEA is one way to sort of front load, know what's coming, know what states are there. I think, you know, it's a great resource to highlight differences between states, and the summaries are great and a great resource for our industry. I definitely think having lots of conversations with your government relations or compliance team is essential. And I would say for any advertisers that are listening to this call, also going to the American Gaming Association and looking at their marketing and advertising code of conduct would be a great resource. They do sort of go down on the website in terms of the do's and don'ts and what it means when they say making sure someone is of age and being responsible for all of the media that is showcasing your brand and making sure that it meets those principles. So I think those are great resources for someone to sort of start digging in and have a comprehensive or basic understanding of expectations.
Oh, really, really good points when it comes to, you know, we do think of advertising as all the stuff I hear when I've got my TV on, which is fairly constant, as well as the stuff we see popping up in our social media, but there's also all sorts of other advertisements, right? Like if you're giving away a kid's backpack that has a gaming company on it, that would be a separate, you know, it's not the kind of swag you want to be handing out. Definitely, those are, you know, I think we are often focused on mass media, and those are really important points to keep in mind. I think that we are actually, sadly, running out of time when it comes to Q&A, but we had such great insights from our panelists that I didn't want to cut you all off. So just to go on to the next slide, I wanted to make sure everybody knows that we do actually have another panel coming up tomorrow, which is on another super important issue in the industry. Advertising is important, but diversity and inclusion also huge for the industry. And we did touch on today the need for talent and the need for diverse talent being especially important. So there is a Idea Growth GeoComply sponsored Power Lunch Summit tomorrow, and you can still sign up for it. So feel free. The link has been provided. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can reach out to me directly if you would like. And I did want to thank everybody once again for attending today's session on advertising do's and don'ts. Also want to thank our expert speakers. They're super important, busy people, and we appreciate your time, Dan, David, Michael, and Anna. Thank you for your perspectives. Also, thank you to IDEA and GeoComply for presenting the webinar. And as mentioned, the second part in the Lunch Summit is tomorrow, same time, 9 o'clock PST, 12 o'clock EST, covering diversity and gaming. Thanks so much, everybody, and lots of developments to follow. We appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For now.